Rupa.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
We won't give you the bumps, don't worry. You were on record as saying previously that young people, the way that young people consume information means that they're most vulnerable to misinformation and fake news. Just wanted you to expand on why.
I think that there's often this misconception that because young people are on social media lots and because they're really savvy about it, they're actually less vulnerable to this stuff, and that it's older people who are more likely to forward something on or believe it or whatever. But actually, from my experience, young people are hyper exposed online to this kind of stuff, whether it's on TikTok or Instagram or whichever platform they're using, Snapchat. And so I think it's really, really important that we don't sort of drop the ball, and actually we understand how young audiences are exposed to misinformation or hate or other things amongst other content on their feeds, and that we really sort of there's quite a lot of data that suggests, and actually that same King's College research that I was talking about people believing in conspiracy theories around terror attacks, crisis actors, etc. It was by far the youngest age group, the 18 to 24-year-olds, and then the sort of 24-year-olds to 30-year-olds, I think it was, who were most likely to believe this stuff, more so than the older people who were surveyed. And also they were most likely to be hyper engaged on social media and on specific platforms like Telegram as well. And we know that Telegram has large groups. Telegram's one of those platforms that's interesting because around the war in Ukraine, for example, we've seen that it's actually been a place that people in Russia have been able to turn for information. It's somewhere where they've been able to find out what's going on outside of Russia and outside of the state-controlled media. But here in the UK, it's certainly a place where conspiracy movements and often extremist groups, far-right groups, have thrived. And that appears to be a place that people who believe this stuff and younger audiences who believe this stuff are also drawn towards.
The one my teenagers are always looking at is Snapchat. They can literally see where everyone is. It's a bit creepy.
Snapchat as well. I mentioned the story of Ollie Stevens, who was murdered in Reading, and I did this panorama investigation, and Snapchat was one of the platforms where a lot of the communication had been shared, and I think there are big questions again, and that investigation sought to kind of ask those of how the social media companies are protecting kids like Ollie and other teenagers who've been affected in that way. But I've tended to find that Snapchat, the questions I've been asking are more so about abusive language, bullying, and less so about misinformation, just because of the nature of the platform.
How do we sort of smash this sort of young people divide that they're not maybe interrogating sources enough? And I imagine you've just brought the average age of correspondence down quite a lot. Will you taught media literacy at school? Because we are fed this thing that they're the most media literate ever, they're super savvy. Just wondered, if that is now on the curriculum, if you had it, and whether the BBC audience is also still ageing.
I think that's a really good question. I spend a lot of time doing social media talking to audiences about social media literacy, everyone from Newsround up to Newsbeat, younger outlets, and also on kind of the BBC social media platforms. And I think just teaching people about how to spot misinformation is really important. It's interesting, there was a piece I did comparing the situation with misinformation in the US and also Finland, where they have a much more kind of rigorous media literacy course as part of their curriculum, and you do see that the proliferation of misinformation or belief in misinformation appears to be lower in somewhere like Finland, but obviously there are other factors at play, and so you can't kind of it's not just about that, but I found that really interesting. I think that with younger audiences, it's really important that we're getting our reports out to the places that they are. So on to the social media platforms, the BBC has a kind of ever-growing TikTok account now, but also podcasts, documentaries, they engage in that very on-demand way. And I think being able to package this stuff in a way that's exciting and engaging and really catches their attention, I certainly find performs particularly well with younger audiences. I also think that there are ways that we can improve social media literacy through the reporting we do, and there's a project, an investigation that I've been doing for the BBC's Americast podcast called The Undercover Voters, and it's 5 characters that I created based on data from the Pew Research Centre. They're like US voters, they're supposed to reflect US voters sitting across the political spectrum. They are different ages, from different places, different backgrounds, etc. And that's just an opportunity to explain to the audience how different people are targeted, even on the same topic, and understanding polarisation and the the subjective social media worlds that you can be a part of, and actually creating those dummy accounts to explore those worlds is one of the only ways of doing that. And I've had a really positive response from younger audiences as well. So I think trying out new innovative ways of explaining to the audience and younger audiences how they're being targeted and what they're seeing and how they can spot what's true and what's false and protect themselves from it is a really important part of my job.
Is it still, last one from me, an ageing audience that the BBC serves? I mean, for ages we've heard it's a bit monolithic, it's a bit old-fashioned. Is it changing?
I think that there's a huge push right now at the BBC, particularly for it to be more digital. I actually think that my job even existing kind of is testament to that, and to report across platforms, because it's important to serve an older audience who are more likely to engage with linear broadcasts, but it's also really important to serve younger audiences. And for example, when I do a BBC Panorama documentary investigation, it will be on BBC One, it'll also be on iPlayer, and we aim to kind of package it in a way that would appeal to both of those audiences. And that can be quite hard sometimes with social media, because you've often got a difference in which platforms people use and what they're doing. But I like to think, and I hope, that the BBC is adapting to the digital world and is certainly putting a lot more into not just the different platforms and the places we cover this stuff, but also how we cover it. And I think that by being really transparent with the audience and really upfront and courageous in our reporting and saying, look, this is misleading and harmful and here's the harm it's done, is a part of that as well.
Thanks, Rupa.